In Twilight Struggle, coups are probably the game's most memorable and exciting mechanisms. They certainly get used a lot, so it makes sense to know how to use them well. We'll look at that here today on Legendary Tactics. Coups are a distinctive and memorable part of the game Twilight Struggle, representing attempts to overthrow a government or gain control of a country through military or covert action. They can be very effective, but there are some things you need to know when doing them. Let's look at their characteristics. To begin, let's look at exactly how they work. When a player plays a card for the operations points, they first pick a coup target. Your opponent needs to have at least one influence point in the target country, and the target country must be free of Defcon restrictions. At Defcon 5, coups can be attempted anywhere in the world. At Defcon 4, Europe is off the table. At Defcon 3, coups cannot be performed in Asia. At Defcon 2, coups cannot be performed in the Middle East. Additionally, coups performed in a battleground country while Defcon is at 2 will lower the Defcon level to 1, which causes the phasing player to lose the game due to causing an undesirable nuclear war. Also, it is important to note that coups carried out in battleground countries worsen the Defcon level, while coups in non-battleground countries have no other effects. If the coup target country is available, the operations points are added to a roll of the six-sided die. A total of twice the stability value of the target country is subtracted from this, and that is the number of your opponent's influence that is removed from the space, until it reaches 0, at which point the extra points are added as your own influence. In this way, a country can swing from one side to another. If the total of operations points plus the die roll are equal to or less than the doubled stability number of the target country, there is no effect at all. This sounds more complicated than it actually is, and is straightforward once you get the hang of it. Now let's take a look at the strategic considerations. First of all, and this may seem obvious, coups can only affect one country at a time. One of the major subtleties of this game is knowing when to place influence or do realignments, and when to go for a coup. You're going to need to take the board state and the Defcon level into consideration. Obviously, if you only have a bunch of low-value, non-battleground countries as potential targets, you'd be better off placing influence or playing a card for the event. By the same token, there may be a key country which is in prime position, weakly influenced by your opponent, and therefore a great opportunity for a coup, so the choice to carry out a coup is obvious. The reality of the situation is usually going to lie between these two extremes. The other thing that you are going to have to take into consideration is your odds of success. This is affected by the stability of the country, the ops of the card that you're using, and the amount of enemy influence already present. You want to make sure that your coup has the maximum odds of success. Interestingly, if you have a chance to play the digital version of Twilight Struggle, when choosing a coup action, the game shows you the odds of success so you can look before you leap, so to speak. It can be a very useful way to get a handle on and develop an instinctive sense of whether a coup will be effective. Obviously, you will want to use your 3 and 4 ops cards for the coups that are most important to your strategy and that can potentially best improve the board position. Cards that are 1 and 2 ops can be used to catch up on the mill ops track and or to potentially flip a vulnerable low stability country. The third consideration is the aforementioned mill ops track. It is very easy for players to be distracted and to play events and place influence due to a perceived pressing need and forget to coup enough to meet the mill ops requirement for the turn. A player can really put themselves behind the 8 ball by ignoring this, as it can lead to a loss of some valuable victory points each turn. Since the USSR typically conducts a coup in their first action round of every turn, the risk of victory point loss via the mill ops track typically lies more with the US player. Usually a coup using 2 operations points will do the trick, as that is usually where Defcon ends up staying most of the game. Try and find at least a valuable non-battleground each turn to make a coup attempt, so as to avoid losing those points. Remember that a 2-point gain by your opponent is described more accurately as a 4-point swing in their favor, and that can really compound over the course of the game to turn it into a strong headwind against you. Make sure you learn which countries are common targets of coups. For example, as the US player, you can count on the Soviet player coupping either Iran or Italy in the first turn, so plan ahead for that. Any battleground countries that are 2 stability or less are also going to be common targets. For example, Pakistan and Thailand in Asia, Mexico and Panama in Central America, Brazil, Venezuela, and Argentina in South America, and every African battleground country except for South Africa. You will want to over-control these if you can, as both an insurance policy and as a deterrent against your enemy's coup attempts. If the stability number is 3 or more, it is generally safe unless you have a small amount of influence there, in which case all bets are off. In general, however, if you control a country like Iraq or India or North Korea, it's probably safe as there are almost always juicier targets elsewhere that have better odds of success. Use the Defcon track to protect yourself against enemy coups. When Defcon is at 2, all battleground countries are safe, so be very careful about opening up opportunities for your opponent to gain access to a region via coup in a non-battleground country. For example, a play into Colombia when you already control Venezuela and Brazil is tempting fate. A successful coup in Colombia lets your opponent into the region and opens up opportunities for disruptive influence placement on their part. So be mindful of your influence placement in non-battleground countries, especially at Defcon 2. Keep in mind the fact that one stability countries can be extremely swingy. If conducting coups and counter-coups back and forth, known as a coup war, one player getting a great roll can put that country effectively out of reach. You can use this to your advantage, but remain vigilant against the negative possibilities that can occur when starting a coup war somewhere. And always keep in mind the possibility of Defcon suicide, accidentally dropping the Defcon level to 1, and learn the cards that put you at the greatest risk. Playing a card which allows your opponent to do a battleground country coup on your turn when Defcon is at 2 is typically how beginner players lose Twilight Struggle by Defcon. Don't let it happen to you. Finally, from a psychological point of view, don't stress too much about your opponent's successful coups and your failed ones. If a coup fails, it can be quite upsetting when you have played your only 4-ops card and roll a 1. But at the end of the day, it is rare that the game is won or lost on a single coup die roll, however disastrous it may seem in the moment. Your opponent is likely to miss on some of their coup rolls as well, and it all generally evens out in the end. Regroup and strategize anew based on the resulting board position, and find a way to win anyway. These are some strategies and approaches to conducting coups effectively in the game Twilight Struggle. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you here next time on Legendary Tactics.